Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Leadership in Aviation. I have someone as a guest today that I have long admired in the industry. We've played tag a little bit, going back and forth with some crazy schedules, but I'm thrilled to have Dan Drohan from Solaris Aviation on today. And Dan, I'm going to start. I told you that I'd have some surprises for you. So I want to know how you got one of my favorite people in aviation to join your team. I heard recently that Ann Holmes told me that she had joined the team, and she told me that it was because of your leadership. So I'm thrilled to be talking to you.
All right, well,
you're
gonna put me on the spot right out of the gate. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Ann joined the team a couple months ago, and it's a really difficult position for us to hire for, Renee. Honestly, what we call the CRO, or the Client Responsible Officer, in our model is sort of the buck stops here person in the aircraft owner relationships, and that model, what I call big enough to matter, small enough to care, has enabled us to grow. But finding really good people that have the necessary background, personality, experience, and mindset has proven to be something that takes a lot more time for us than we have really originally planned on. So we were really fortunate. Anne is someone who I think I had met previous, and there were a couple of members of our team that knew her very well, and we feel really fortunate to have her on the team. She's doing great, by the way. She's hitting the ground running, and I think still drinking through a little bit of a fire hose, but we'll get her there. I always tell, whenever we bring a new executive into Solaris, I always say the first year's free. So it's sort of, you get to be a dummy for a year around here because it is a different environment. It is a different culture. And, I also think that we all collectively in aviation, everybody works really hard. Certainly, I don't think there are a lot of 40-hour weeks in aviation. And what I have found is that when you bring people in from another organization or from the outside, you just have to let people sort of ruminate and marinate a little bit in the culture of the company, because they will make better decisions on behalf of the brand and the team if they know it better. And the only way to get them to know it better is to really just be in it, as opposed to just forcing them into the pipeline of getting stuff done. So Anne is in that mode right now. So she's learning all sorts of new stuff after her 30 plus years in aviation, and she's got a whole new approach to it.
Well, you dropped about 18 leadership nuggets right there, and I'm going to dive into some of those.
Okay.
Wow, that's a whole bunch of secrets to your leadership all at once. So one of the first things that I heard you say is that you do something, you didn't call it this, but I would call it values-based hiring. So you hire someone who can align with your mindset and the way that you treat your clients and your customers and the way that you integrate into the team. Would you talk a little bit more about that? Because I know that's not just at the top. You hire for values all the way throughout the company.
Absolutely. And I think you will hear today the theme that, from my perspective, in aviation, we're a very hands-on management style anywhere. We are prone to that. And I think one of the things that oftentimes people forget to do is to take the most important step, which is the one backwards, right? So you arm people with the tools and the resources and all the scaffolding and everything they need to do the job. But then you got to take a step back. And to that degree, I really don't get a lot involved in much of the hiring around here, except for the executive team. So all of our client services people and flight coordinators and accounting staff and flight ops and maintenance ops, pilots for the accounts that I'm the CRO, or the Client Responsible Officer. But so much of the hiring is pushed down to the field level, where people are actually integrating with these people and working with them. So that's an important point I should make, is that really it's just the executive team where I'm involved directly in the hiring. Personality is such an important part of this process, especially in this business, Renee, where technical skill set has to be there too, and I get that, and I don't mean to minimize that or downplay how important expertise is, but I find that the analysis between a high IQ and a high EQ is really relevant in aviation, because this is a relationship-based business, more so than psychotherapy, I always tell people. So I think personality fit and finish is probably the most important thing we look for. And then secondarily, we start looking at experience and technical qualifications. But look, at the end of the day, in dealing with high net worth people, frankly, I don't really draw on 30 years of aviation experience all that much. It's mostly personality and how I interrelate with the people side of that business.
Well, I think we probably ought to take a step back here just for a second, because you mentioned that you have high net worth clients. Will you tell our listeners what it is that Solaris Aviation does and where your footprint is now?
Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
probably important.
Great question. So today we manage about 280 airplanes all over the country. And so we're working with private individuals, corporations, big and small, public and private, and ultimately at the head of most of these accounts, whether it is public, private, big or small, there is an ultra high net worth individual or individuals that we're managing the asset for. Ultimately though we are an aircraft management company, I always make the distinction that there are aircraft management companies with charter certificates, and then there are charter companies that also manage airplanes. We are very much so a management company. And so I view us really as an asset manager, because so much of what we do, we don't get involved in the transaction work or direct, MRO or OEM work. We're subbing all of that out. Really what we're doing is working with that one individual or the individuals that own the airplane on allocating, how the airplane's used and all the support network beneath it. So we've got about 1,800 employees. Largely remote, actually. If I could turn the camera and show you our Petaluma, California office right now, I think there are probably 20 people here, and 3 years ago today there were about 70 or 80. So we've had to pivot just like everybody, and we can talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about that. But first, for those people who are not in aviation who are listening to the podcast, and I know we do have some listeners like that, the assets that Dan's company is managing are private jets, everything from, I know they have, or they used to have, a couple of King Airs all the way up to some brand new Gulfstreams that they're bringing online.
We operate about 100 Gulfstream, 100 Bombardier product, and then a smattering of Dassault, Textron, Embraer. We've got a few helicopters mixed in there. So it's, as I say to people, we'll manage a blimp if it's the right relationship. And I do believe, we've got a lot of really good, solid competitors in this business. And we're proud of that. I operate under what I call coopetition, right? So today I might be competing against one of our nearest and dearest competitors. And tomorrow, the success of our relationship with a client really depends on whether one of those same competitors will help us out of a situation today. So it's a unique operating environment, but ultimately we're more about the relationship side of it. We will manage anything that somebody brings to us that we think that it's a good relationship.
Dan, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what happened to you and your company over the last few years. You mentioned the decrease in number of personnel in one of your offices, but we saw at the beginning of the pandemic a whole bunch of charter activity as people were trying to get their loved ones to a particular location and did not want to be on commercial airplanes. And then we saw just no activity for a little while. And then we saw a steady pickup. And over the last probably 18 months, we've seen just an explosion in activity. First-time aircraft owners, first-time charter buyers, people who just finally said, you know what? This makes sense for me. It's not a luxury item anymore. It's a non-negotiable. So can you talk to me about how you led
a couple of
that?
threads to pull there that I think are really important. First of all, in sort of the big picture, I think that while all of those have been really, you're absolutely right in your timing and sort of articulation around what's happened. Right now, in my opinion, Renee, our entire industry is, I'm going to call it overpressurized. Right. The airplanes are flying more than they were, than they have historically. OEMs, have multi-year waiting lists. Maintenance and repair organizations have lines out the door. Their staff is pressed too hard. FBO services, and then you get down in sort of the ancillary where you're starting to talk about limousines, catering companies. The entire support network of our industry is pressed really hard right now. And that sort of answers the end of that. But as we look at kind of how we went into COVID, number one, I will say that I could have never predicted what ended up happening in the fall of 19, when we sort of quickly zoomed out of it, and then it dropped it back down, you remember, but end of 19 and end of 20 into 21, I just, by March or call it April of 20, I think our industry was confronting some of the darkest days we've ever seen. I think we flew literally less than, $100,000 worth of charter in the first couple of weeks of April, which is just, it's zero. And though the organization was, we had built it up over 11 years at that point to where we were put into a spot where you kind of were dancing this line of, when do I act or not act? And acting or not acting could be survival or not survival. I was a pessimist because, sort of post 9/11, had been through that in aviation. And then, of course, all of us were part of the 2008 bubble burst, had been through that in aviation. I saw this as just yet another challenge that we would confront as an industry that, could potentially have taken us down, not from a PR perspective, but just that there was going to not be a need for travel for so long that there would be no industry left. We were largely decentralized in our staffing model to begin with. So I mentioned the sort of 70 or 80 people that would have been here in our headquarters office, but there were another 70 or 80 staff that were external and working from home already. And I have to give credit where it's due. My business partner, John King, who I know John is brilliant when it comes to technology, and had done so much in the previous 10 years to get us to a place where we were working efficiently remotely. And I will say, from a perspective of pride, I think we are more remote based than our worthy competitors right now. And I think we were even before the pandemic. So we had the technology in place, we had the systems in place. So it wasn't as much of a pivot for the team as we would have expected. But when the floor drops out from under you and all of a sudden you go from doing 100 flights a day to doing 5, there are certain elements of the company that either, you need to put into bed for a while, or you need to pivot around. And ultimately, we ended up having to do a reduction in force in June. And I'm proud to say that about 90% of the folks that were impacted by that came back by September of that same year. So it was a very short window. But, to your point, it started picking up in sort of September, October, and it hasn't stopped. The average Solaris account, which may have been flying 200 hours a year, now flies 400 hours a year. And so you think about what that does, not just to our organization, but across the country on the infrastructure and systems of aviation. Everybody's tired and everybody's worn out. And we are seeing it literally on a daily basis, with ground tow incidents increasing. It's impossible to get training dates. It's impossible to get maintenance dates. All of this stuff is having a detrimental impact. So it's a great problem to have, because business aviation is alive and well, as you know, in your business, but there are unintended consequences of just how well we are all doing.
Well, I want to ask you about that. So what are you doing to combat the weariness of your workforce right now? What's the secret sauce there?
Yeah, well, boy, that's again, a couple threads to pull. So I'm a big believer that by calling attention to things, we take the first most important step to resolving them. We're fortunate in our business model, Renee, because the staffing of each account is really, though led and managed by us, it's funded by each account. So I may have one G650 owner that has a methodology and a mindset around how they do their staffing, but we could have someone sitting in the hangar right next to them with another 650 who thinks differently about it. and that account is staffed differently or the work tempo is different. So really, I view our role as an organization to help educate our clients and make sure that there's ration and reason into it and balance. I think that crew retention, and by crew, I'm saying pilots, flight attendants, and maintenance supervisors, which are our 3 work groups that are dedicated by account. It comes down to what I call the 3 C's: communication, compromise, and compensation. Communication is, I believe, fundamentally at the root of 95% of the problems we have in this business. And we talk about that a lot internally here. Too much, too little, bad format, poor timing, poor choice of words, whatever it is. But in the case of how we think about retention in crew and really placing value on these really important assets that are our people who are dedicated to these accounts, I try to encourage our clients to be really highly communicative with their crew, because around that communication creates expectation. And when expectations are set, everybody's on the same page. So we really try to coach our clients little things, candidly. When you're walking down the stairs after the trip, instead of saying, okay, see ya, say, okay, see ya, by the way, I don't think I'm going to fly at all next week. Or, okay, see ya, comma, next week's going to be really heavy, I'll be in touch. That little bit of communication sets into motion everybody having expectations around what their lives are going to be like. And the more our clients can do that, and the more we encourage them to do it, the better the lives of the crew. Compromise, to me, again, is about communication, but it's also about understanding that our crew are people too, and they have lives and weddings they need to go to, or family trips they want to take and things like that. And instead of taking a hard line and drawing a hard line in the sand around how they think about their teams, compromise a little bit. Say it's okay to hire a contract pilot. Say it's okay for your maintenance supervisor to receive the flight at 2 a.m, or to sub that out to a friend to cover it because he's got a kid's soccer game at 6 o'clock the next morning. Little things that we can do to create compromise in the relationship, but it's got to float both ways. And by the way, I don't think that in any of those 3 C categories, Renee, that it's just full throttle on all 3. It's finding happy medium, right? Compensation right now is a hot topic. You know that in the pilot community, well, frankly, pilot, mechanic, and flight attendant community. I feel like we've been a good partner for both our employees and for our clients in finding, again, the compromise and communication around compensation. You have to hit all of these wickets, in my opinion, in order to address workforce issues. And then we have to turn around and do the same thing here on the admin and support team side at Solaris. It's been interesting, and maybe you've seen this in your business too, but the pandemic has, in some ways, though it has made it so people didn't have to drive, or we've been able to hire staff from all over the country to do jobs that were just being done in Petaluma before in some cases. And though it has created in some ways connectivity virtually like this that we didn't use before, I guess I have to be honest and say that I'm missing the human connective tissue a little bit. We did our first in-person in-doc class last week, and had 20 pilots there, and fortunately I had to travel for work, it figured, but the feedback I got immediately following that class, resoundingly from both pilots that were there as well as support team people that were there, was that it was just so good to see people in person again. So I think we're all missing that, and I'm hoping that we're, as an industry, trending back to that. But again, because it's so overpressurized and everybody's tugged in so many different directions, I think we're in a zone right now of needing to create new habit patterns a little bit.
I think that's so wise. I think creating new habit patterns, kind of taking the lessons that we learned from being able to work more efficiently and more productively without having to commute, and taking some of the things that we missed or that we took for granted when we all got together and were at parties together or had happy hours together, really working in person on projects together, I think are all really valuable. And I think that we're coming into a season of finding the happy medium of those things. And
that's a really great way to put it. And I will tell you that from our perspective, I get feedback from both sides. We have a system that we use internally where I'm getting basically anonymous feedback from employees all over the country, all over the world, technically. And I'm responding personally back to a lot of these messages. And I don't know who they are, but they know who I am, obviously. And one of the things that we've been bringing up is really, how do we think about the return to work, the return to the office? And it is such a mixed bag. I mean, there are people that were back here, in September of 20, that even the summer was enough for them. They knew that they were not good working from home for whatever reason. And they wanted to be back here. And really, we're sort of sneaking around to say, hey, are you okay if we're back in 40 hours a week? It's like begging to come back to the office. Conversely, there were people that, back in March of 2020, when they moved that monitor out of their cube and took it home, it's never coming back here. And we're trying to figure out, okay, that's okay, but we need to figure out how to keep these people part of this fabric that has become so important to how we've grown the company. And I only say that, Renee, because I think, we're a young brand, young company. 11, 12, 13 years is not a long time in this business. And even though most of the people on the executive team are much more experienced than that, our culture has always been sort of entrepreneurial and high human touch, and we make a lot of EQ based decisions. And it's hard to do that over a computer screen. I mean, you can get kind of 70% of the way there, but you really need to be in the same room with people in order to make good decisions. And unfortunately, we're just not there yet.
So how do you compensate for that in the meantime?
Well, it's a current agenda item for me, candidly. I mean, I'm going to travel more this year probably than I have in the last 3. Just because I want to get out. I had this sort of secret ambition at the end of last year that I wanted to shake the hand of every Solaris employee, which is completely nuts. And I'm not sure I'll ever be able to pull it off, but in some way, shape, or form, we want to get out there, and we're creating some events, internal events, casual, but still meaningful, to get people together. But, I am starving to get that human touch and human connectivity back. Because it's been sorely missed, at least by me and other members of the executive team. I think, candidly, when we talk about the crew dedicated to accounts, most of these are guys and gals that are just doing the job. And, Solaris, they're in the background. They process our payroll and our expense checks, but really we're all about the principal on the airplane. Totally agree. That's where we want them focused. And it's unique to our model that we really want them focused on that person and not this group. But at the same time, they can't get it done without us, and we can't get it done without them. And therefore, there should be connectivity there. And I would say 99% of our teams agree and recognize that. So I think it's trying to get in front of them, I guess, is the short answer.
I love that. I think it's really important that as we morph into whatever a new normal looks like, that we really pay attention to the factors that affect retention. And, I did a workplace culture survey recently, and there were some interesting results about that, right? People are really passionate about their work. They know what their job responsibilities are. And, just really understanding what their value is to the company is something that scored high marks among employees.
Yeah.
But what a lot of employees said is that they don't really feel connected to the mission of the company, or that values are clearly articulated in the company that they work for. And this was the most surprising thing. The thing that scored the absolute least on this survey, and I surveyed employees and managers, the employees said poor performance is not consistently addressed.
Yeah.
And so
which, by the way, let's be clear, that is absolutely a consequence of the hiring marketplace. It's a consequence of the pandemic, all sorts of things that feed into that. But look, I think that's prevalent everywhere in our industry, that failure is not addressed quickly enough or aggressively enough. And on one hand, it's hard to drive a culture where people feel free to fail, which I think you want. You want people to feel like they can bring experimental ideas or new ideas that might not work. And I will tell you that around here, I mean, we throw hundreds of ideas on the table and only end up really executing on 10 of those 100 because we know the other 90 will fail. And actually, of the 10 that we try, maybe 8 of them fail and we stick with one of the 2. So you see, so you can't, they sort of contradict each other conceptually. You want people to bring their game so that they do fail, but then as an industry, we don't do a lot about the cost of failure. And in an industry whose primary objective is safety, failure and safety that's a tough thing to talk around, right? But I think what you're talking here more about is really cultural failure, right? And relationship failure. And I go back to my point on communication. 95, and I say 95% of the problems. I'm going to say 95% of even the HR problems we see could have been fixed or resolved or mitigated or lightened, at least, if people had just communicated better. And it's amazing how often it doesn't happen. And I think some of what you saw in the results on the survey that you mentioned really come from that. We're still, whether we like it or not, most of our clients, I think that the flight department is not, we get very passionate about airplanes and pilots and flying places and working on airplanes and the airplanes themselves. To most of our clients, it's just a means of transportation. They're not as passionate about it as, say, I am or you are. And so we forget that. And we think that they should be as excited and as involved and worried and all that as we are. And the fact of the matter is they just want to climb the stairs and turn right and get from A to B in most cases. And that tends to breed lack of involvement, lack of interest, maybe not getting involved in the flight department's politics or thought process or planning or whatever it is, then the flight department would really like to see happen.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think communication is huge. Going back to the survey, not to belabor this point, but one of the things that we saw was an indicator of people wanting to leave the industry was not understanding a clear advancement path where they are and doing work on the FAA's behalf on why there are so few women in the industry. A lot of that is because of this failure to communicate, failure in cultural relationships kind of issues. It's really in having that clear communication. And you and I have a mutual friend in Kimberly Perkins, and her studies about psychological safety, specifically in the cockpit, almost all of those are about lack of communication or lack of respectful communication. And that starts to get into not just a retention issue, but some safety issues from an operational standpoint. So I think you're spot on that 95% of it is communication. I think that's a really important takeaway from today's podcast.
And to draw attention to a point you made, less than 5% is what we face as far as women in aviation, right? I mean, it's an atrocious data point. And I think it's getting addressed more. And again, back to my point, calling attention to a problem is usually the first step in resolving it. And I think we're doing a lot more in that regard now than we were. And, you kind of say, well, it's about damn time, right? I mean, when we look at DEI effort across the board, not just in gender, but in all aspects, we hold the key to solve our staffing problem in our pocket. We've got transitioning military aviators who are, 90 something percent of them are going to the airlines. We've got college kids who, get sort of spit out from the colleges. And then there's this crevasse in between graduation and first job that business aviation has done very little to fill in. And then, you've got candidly all, the underrepresented communities where it's like, these are people that would love to be in the industry that we're not doing enough to get them in. And, I don't profess to have the fix to it. I think there are certain things we can do more and better. But again, calling attention to it first has to be the first step for sure. And that's even
I think
before you get to the psychological side of all those things, which is very real for sure.
it is. It is. Well, I appreciate that you're recognizing that we need to do that. And I would just, call out to everyone who's listening to this that it's going to involve everyone. Everyone in this industry needs to get involved in reaching out to the next generation and exposing them to aviation, really inviting them to be part of this community. And I think we looked at 48 different job roles. It's not just pilots that we need in this industry, but executives and finance people and customer relationship managers and mechanics and dispatchers and air traffic controllers and salespeople and marketers. The number of occupations in this industry are endless, and yet most of our recruiting efforts are specifically for pilots. And while that's very important, I think that we can all do a little bit better job and be a little bit more purposeful about reaching out.
And I'll tell you, I think that the area of maintainers, we're actually stretched thinner in the maintainer world than we are in the pilot world, believe it or not. And this is existential. I mean, it's, but the fact is that times of high demand and low supply will usually drive different thought process. And right now we're in the initial phase of that, where people are just paying more money for it. So that's worked out really well for the workforce because they've been able to sort of get a better wage. And I'm seeing this, I don't know about you, but across the board, not just maintainers and pilots and flight attendants, but even in support staff. And candidly, Renee, having been in it a long time, two things that are real. One is that this is a business and an industry that takes advantage of people's passions. You can always find someone that will sort of fly for food, so to speak. And that's become kind of a habit pattern in this business that the employers then have at times been able to take advantage of. And we're now in this zone where, guess what? People won't fly for food anymore. They actually want a living wage, and actually maybe even better than a living wage, which is what they deserve. So I think, again, that low supply, high demand is driving some of that. But I also think that it's, we do not a good enough job of bridging that gap in between interest and passion and employment. And it's a hard, you've got the airlines that do their ab initio programs, United now, Alaska Airlines, both starting with flight schools, awesome programs in my book. But I always say to our employees here, look, we use the airlines every day. We're moving people all around the country to support our business. But at the end of the day, they're competitors for these people. So we have to acknowledge the fact that we're fighting over the same group of folks. And right now, candidly, they're kicking our butts. I mean, the airlines are getting to the college campuses. The airlines are getting into the ready rooms and the mindsets of the transitioning military aviator way better than we are. And ultimately, as long as we're pulling people into the industry, it's sort of a half win. But we can do better and we can get more of them. And by the way, it solves so many problems to get those men and women into our side of the industry. Going back to that overpressurization, right? That's how we solve the problem. The solution is in our hand. We have to execute on it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you'll hear me talk about this forever, but I think that we really have to be conscious of what kind of workplace environment we're creating for people who come into the industry. I don't know if you've heard this stat, but Disney is the biggest employer of freshly minted aircraft technicians. They are pulling them out of A&P school and hiring them to work on rides.
Roller coasters. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's sort of scary.
It's really scary, but here's the thing is that they're offering them great benefits. They're offering them a predictable work schedule. They're offering them some perks that we have pretty competitive perks in the aviation industry, but there are some things that they're doing very purposefully to attract these highly qualified technicians. And if we don't stop that hemorrhaging, then we're going to end up with burnt out technicians who are like, you know what, maybe it is better over at Disney after they've been in for 20 years.
that's where we are. I mean, I see it on the faces of our own team members. And on one hand, it's a mixed blessing, right? I would love to say this is the new era, and we have to create again the new habit patterns around the new era. But if there's no staff to draw from, or you don't have the budget for it, or whatever your reasons are why you can't staff up to address it, that's the burnout is why people leave. And you were describing that job, and I was sort of thinking, yeah, working on roller coasters is a lot like we're going to work for an airline. Set schedule, some perks, it's predictable, I mean, there are all sorts of reasons why that's as good or better a job. And by the way, if it's paying better, then why work on airplanes other than the passion side, which
Right.
I think that is always going to be. It's a romantic industry to be a part of. There's such a great history to it, and the nuances are there. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't have to compromise, a livelihood just to be in the industry that you want to work in. And I think for too
Right.
long, we have expected that on the fringes of our industry.
I dare say we may have exploited that,
Yeah.
and I think we're at the point where the fact that aviation's sexy isn't enough anymore.
That's right.
It has to be something that's sustainable, a sustainable lifestyle for people. And frankly, the millennials and Gen Zers who might be listening here are aware that that's available to
Yeah.
them, right? They're not
Yeah.
working for the 30-year Rolex in the corner office. They're
Yeah.
working for a lifestyle that they can support for their family. And so I think as leaders in this industry, we need to be really cautious of that. I want to talk a little bit more about Solaris and the innovation that you have. I know you've talked about having separate accounts, really separated out so that each account is run separately, but you've done some technology advances to support that as well. And
Yeah.
I don't want to give away all your secrets
No,
to your
look, I'm
competitors,
happy to talk. I sort of figure all this
great.
stuff is out in the open anyway. So, I mentioned earlier, Renee, that our mantra around here is big enough to matter, small enough to care. Like other management companies, when it comes to certain purchasing areas, fuel, training, insurance, and whatnot, we can lever our size on behalf of our clients. I think the small enough to care part really speaks to how we build the accounts around each individual that is the client, and how we build the team around the client. And we've got some cool things that we do that might be a little bit more secret saucy around how we hire the right client aviation manager, the leader for the account, which is not always a pilot. We've got, I think, about 15 or 20 maintenance supervisors that are the client aviation manager. But how we hire that person and pair them with the client. But ultimately, it is for all of us in this corner of the industry, the management companies. It tends to be a pretty sticky business. Once you can build a relationship of trust and become what I call the airplane guy or gal for that client, meaning that client trusts you and they will call you every time they have a question, whether they're riding in a friend's airplane, thinking about wanting to buy an airplane, whether they're getting a maintenance operation done, even what catering company to use. If they know that you are a good resource to call for introductions or referrals or ideas, that creates the glue in the relationship. And so we have been extraordinarily successful in building that glue. And the IT platforms have been a big part of that. So how we manage the money is a little bit different in our environment than some other management companies. But we also have two platforms. One is our client accounting portal. That was a piece of software that we wrote with a software developer. And then now a mobile version of it on how our clients access that information. And that's been a big part of building trust and transparency. Transparency has become more of a buzzword in our industry in the last decade. And I'd like to feel that Solaris has had a little hand in helping make that happen, because it's been a big part of how we built our model. But ultimately, putting the data on the table, but that doesn't mean that the clients are going to like it. And so you got to make sure you got to make sure you're fighting for them on their behalf. I have something I call the advocacy continuum. I usually will draw it out. So I need to ask you to sort of think about it in your head. But ultimately, what we came to discover in this business is that, every company has clients. And you can call them customers, you can call them clients, you can call them owners. They are people who are paying the firm for its services. About 5% of companies are able to successfully grow and migrate their clients into what I call a fan. And a fan is still a customer, they're still doing business with you, but when asked, they will say good things about your brand. Whereas a client is just someone who's doing business with you. A fan is someone who's doing business with you really willingly and will say good things when asked. 5% of that 5% are able to grow those same clients into fans and those fans into advocates. And I always capitalize the word advocate, because an advocate is still a client, they are still a fan, but they are someone who is literally bursting out of the doors at the end of every interaction with your company, looking for someone to say good things about you. We have been unbelievably lucky, or good, I'm not sure which, but we have been able to transition a lot of our clients, employees, vendors, and even competitors into advocates. And I think, again, back to competition, we work in an industry where I need my competitors. And though I don't know if they think of us the same way, but I couldn't make it through a week. And I've got two very big competitors that are a defense contractor and a big multinational conglomerate. They're big companies. We couldn't make it through the week without both of them because of how we interrelate with their brands. So that concept of turning employees, clients, vendors, and competitors into advocates, and nobody ever goes there and stays there, Renee. They sort of slide back and forth as the weeks go. But that has driven for us really every decision we make, even on the topic of IT, because we really want to create advocates out of everybody we're dealing with. And so when you approach an IT project saying, what are we building? Why are we building it? And what do we expect to get on the back end of it? And again, I quickly get into John King's part of our company, and I am not the IT guy. I should pre-qualify that, but that's been the mindset around this stuff, and we have placed significant investment in it. But it has paid dividends on the transparency and ease of use in building advocacy in all of those categories that we just talked about. Does that make sense?
Wow, absolutely. And I think that's the secret sauce at Solaris.
Maybe. I don't know.
I know that people are thinking about, okay, how can I work for this company? I'm assuming you have a careers page on your website. Is that right?
We do, and we are definitely hiring. Back to our previous conversation. I mean, I think right now we've got something like 50 or more aircrew positions open. I think there are probably a dozen or more maintenance supervisor positions. We are constantly hiring flight coordinators, client services people, accounting people, which is one of those departments we talked about that used to be here in California that we're now allowing people to work remotely. So we've been able to go much more national in our support mechanisms, which has really brought some incredible talent to the table for us.
I love it. Well, Dan, thanks so much for being here with me today. I've loved having this conversation with you.
Likewise.
I'm sure that we could get together and talk for hours and hours about all of this. And I definitely want to mention to our listeners today that we do have that workplace culture survey report available on our website, theaviationcollective.com. And of course, you heard that Dan is hiring. If you're an executive, you'll interview with him and can have a conversation just like this one. But he has a great team looking for a number of highly qualified people. And across the board, I've heard great things about his workplace culture. Dan, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Renee.